In a world of twisted facts, alternative narratives, corrupted corporations, and hacked feeds, how can we decipher the difference between truth and fiction? It's time to take back the truth. Read Robert Kiyosaki's Fake and learn the signs to recognize fake money, fake teachers, and fake assets. Determine what's real in a world where falsehoods are a weapon. Don't let fake advice destroy your financial future. Visit therealkiyosaki.com to read Fake by Robert Kiyosaki. That's therealkiyosaki.com.
This is the Rich Dad Radio Show. The good news and bad news about money. Here's Robert Kiyosaki.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. This is Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. We have a very interesting show today because if you knew the future was today, I mean, everything that I've been talking about and a lot of other, fortune tellers have been talking about is today, what would you do? I mean, what if you knew the apocalypse was happening as we speak? Would you do the same thing or would you go do something else? So a very important show because we have a very important man. His former congressman and former presidential candidate, Ron Paul. During the last presidential campaigns, he was the most popular candidate on college campuses, which is something to say. And in the 1970s, Ron Paul became my hero. I found a little green book of his. He was writing about money and gold and all these things. And I wish I had that book today. But anyway, so I've been a follower of Congressman Paul for years. And today's program, and he's been forecasting, I hate to use these words, but the end of times, the apocalypse. I think we're in it today. And I just asked him to tell us what he's been seeing because as far as I'm concerned, he's been calling this for the last 40, 50 years. Any comments, Kim?
Well, I'd just like to get started because Dr. Ron Paul is, he's refreshing. I listen to him and I know sometimes he talks about things that are not the most pleasant things to talk about, but it makes so much sense. It's just common sense. And so I would just like to get started. Welcome to the show, Dr. Ron Paul.
Thank you very much being with you today.
Yeah, so Ron, you called, back in the 70s when that green book was, you talked about how you were talking about gold and the end of the dollar. You've written about end of Fed. You've talked about the revolution that's here today, the school revolution, an answer to our broken education system, and most importantly, end the Fed. So you've been very outspoken, and my concern is, and this is for my readers' sake, what you've been saying since the 70s is here today. So I just want you to talk about what's on your mind, what are your concerns about, and we're not politically correct. So what are you concerned about today?
I'm concerned today about all the things I was concerned about, in the early 70s, but more so. I got involved by being exposed to Austrian economics in the 1960s and talking about the Bretton Woods Agreement, and I became fascinated with the monetary issue and Federal Reserves and this whole thing, the gold standard. And the predictions made back then by the Austrian economists came to fruition because in 1971 the whole thing fell apart. And to me, that was a big deal. It was significant, and that was the birth of something that never happened before, and that is the total world has been engaged in a fiat monetary system of which we're the so-called manager, and we get tremendous benefits from it. But it's also the source of all the mistakes made because we took what was used as a measuring of value, which was gold or a precious metal, and turned it into something that it was mystical and came from government. And this caused people to make a lot of mistakes. But it caused a lot of people to make a lot of money, too, because in the process of creating money out of thin air, there are always beneficiaries. And I think what we're facing today and why it's so significant is the ultimate the ultimate process will bring it to the point where there's a very, very gross distortion of wealth distribution. I think that's the biggest thing we're facing today, and one of the reasons why the socialists are claiming they're getting an edge on us, because the wealthy are getting wealthier and the poor are getting poorer, and the middle class is being wiped out, and yet there's too many people people now open up to the subject of, well, we're a shortage of money, prices are high, so send us more money. And yes, it's those capitalists, those free market people. They're the ones who gave us this, and that's why we have to have socialism.
So
I think it.
So you know, but I agree 100% with you. But, you know, when I talk to people and I say similar things as you're saying, people say, well, the economy is booming, stocks have never been higher, my 401k is, I'm happy, and unemployment is low. But isn't that, what do you have to say to that?
Well, the statistics, can be used to do that, and that is true, but there's still a lot of people that are very, very unhappy, and they're very, very much in debt, and they don't have any savings, and the jobs that they have aren't necessarily well paying. And if you look at young people coming out of college, they spend a lot of money and time getting a degree that doesn't do them much good, and they owe hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now it's $1.4 trillion. That doesn't go totally unnoticed. So the superficial thing, what I think you're pointing out is we don't have the bully pulpit, we don't have control of the Main Street media, so they're able to propagandize and paint a certain picture. When I spent a lot more time than I do now, I still go to the campuses. I always thought, why are they so interested? And a lot of people, even though I told them there was bad times ahead and we shouldn't be doing this, they always saw me as an optimist. And, of course, I like to think of myself as an optimist because we're in a mess, but there are answers to it. And that's what I offered. So this is what I think is very important. But I've also said something very popular on the campuses, that if we were to have everything eliminated right now and everybody lost all their wealth and we all went broke, how could we get back on our feet again? I say it's not a big problem if you have one thing, and that's our liberty. The liberty, which means it's our life. We spend it the way we want. We're, at a point where we are rewarded. We don't have an income tax and all these things. It takes us about a year, and we'd be back on our feet again. People talk about the economics, but they don't talk about the source of wealth, and that comes from, from liberty.
Right. So Dr. Ron, what is behind the push for socialism? What's driving that?
Well, I think it's demagoguery, power mongers that are looking to play on people. The people who are promoting it are usually very wealthy. I've talked to these people, and they're very willing to admit that the people can't take care of themselves. They're all very dumb, and we have to take care of them. And capitalism, free markets don't work, so therefore we need authoritarians. It's a contest between authoritarian society and a voluntary society.
So let me ask you this. What I'm hearing today, because I stay away from campuses as much as I can, they're throwing off anybody who has, let's say, a conservative or a right point of view. And you are doing the presidential campaigns. You were the most popular guy on campuses, college campuses. Are you still popular today?
Well, I don't go quite as much, but I still go. I still work with Young Americans for Liberty, and that was an outgrowth, from my campaigns. And it's a very, very powerful organization, and they have hundreds and hundreds of chapters throughout the country. And I go to their meetings, and I go to their campuses, and they're in a minority, but that doesn't even bother me because, the 8 or 10% you need to change a society, the people who are the thought leaders, the people who are more philosophic, is what you need. So the others are pandering to and using the demagoguery of a free lunch. But common sense tells us that's not going to work. So it is a tough contest because I remember when I first decided to run for Congress as a lark, I told my wife, what I was doing. I said, I can't possibly ever get elected because I'm running against Santa Claus. She thought differently. But, and I've concluded over the years, and she even suggested it way back, she says, no, it's going to be different because what the people really deep down in their heart want to hear is the truth. truth. And that is, I think, what is necessary, and that's where I think I come across, in a positive way, that I am very, very convinced of the benefits of liberty and property and sound money. At the same time, I also know about my shortcomings and that sort of thing. But the message, I don't think it's flawed at all. I think I'm always amazed at not only myself but others and every one of us who believe this way. Why aren't we doing a better job? If this is as wonderful as I think, why aren't we convincing more people? So I'm convinced. I'm convinced the message is great. So that's the reason I persist.
So why is the message? To me, like I said, in the 70s, I read what was that first little grain book you pumped out? It was great, but it was the first time I latched onto your message because it followed my message. But why is it swinging the other way so hard right now?
And what do we need to do to swing it back?
Well, I think we're doing what we should do. You have a program, and you're well known, and you reach a lot of people. You have no idea how many people's minds you have changed. I go now around the country, not in a campaign fashion, but I'm meeting people all the time that have started different organizations, have published books, that are teachers, they have an internet program. And so I come across thinking the groundwork has been laid, and that we have the answers to the problems. And I see this coming collapse of the economic system as very dangerous, but also as a wonderful opportunity. The collapse of the Soviet system. I was drafted in the '60s, and I know what it was like to be involved in the Cold War. But the collapse came not with a nuclear exchange with the Russians, and it came without a whimper almost. It's a tragedy that we're trying to stir up that trouble again, but there was a tremendous achievement with that because their system failed. And this is what Mises always said. He says, the socialism just doesn't work. In the 20th century was a total failure for socialism, whether it's Nazism, fascism, communism, or just plain old socialism, which, we're seeing all around it. Why can't we win if we just won't quit talking about Venezuela and Zimbabwe and Iran and all these countries that are in trouble, and also working hard to tell the people the truth about what's going on in America? Because believe me, I think there's a lot more suffering going on than what is portrayed, by the propaganda.
But aren't you also saying, because this is what I'm saying, the suffering's yet to come?
Oh, I think it's going to get a lot worse. People will say, well, you sound optimistic, but when's this going to happen? Next year, are we going to change the contract? No, I don't believe it happens that way. I went. I did my best. I encourage people to go. I encourage people to do whatever they want and can do, to promote the message. But no, it's whatever method we can have. We have to spread that message. But I think, and I always tell people that we're not going to get a majority in the Congress, that all of a sudden they're going to vote away food stamps and vote down the military-industrial complex and bring our troops home and make sure the Fourth Amendment is obeyed and we all have our privacy and our property. No, that's not going to happen. It's going to get a lot worse. The spending is going to continue. Nobody knows exactly how this will evolve. It's just hard for me to believe that we'd be stupid enough, to let this get to the point where the dollar crashes, like the Zimbabwe money and the Venezuela money. I would hope that we would wise up before then and have, some monetary reform and say, no, you just can't get away with that. But I do believe very sincerely that all the mistakes made, especially since 1971, that will have to be corrected. And the most important issue that you have in economics is the price of money. Low interest rates cause people to make mistakes. It makes people mistake on their spending habits, their investment habits, their savings habits, and we have not had a measuring rod. We don't have a currency we can measure in value, and then we have gross distortion. The market's not even allowed to decide what they think about the dollar because we will control it, And
right.
So that means the bubble is bigger, it involves so many people, it involves the entire world. So I think it's going to be very, very major. But on the longer run, I think the message will prevail. That.
Well, you are an optimist. But anyway, Dr. Paul, once again, Robert Kiyosaki was speaking to former Congressman and presidential candidate Ron Paul. He's the author of The Revolution of 10 Years. And he said a very important word that I don't know if you guys picked up on it. And the word wasn't crash. The word was collapse. There's a very big difference between the words crash and collapse. And that's what I've been calling for, is a collapse. And they say that not to be pessimistic, but more to have, to perk people's ears up and maybe pay attention, as I did back in the 70s when I first came across Ron Paul's books. When we come back, we'll be talking to former Congressman, presidential candidate Ron Paul. What does collapse mean?
You're listening to the Rich Dad Radio Show with Robert Kiyosaki.
Don't be like Charlie. Charlie is that do-it-yourselfer who does himself in. Do-it-yourself is good for tile and grout. It is not good for asset protection. Charlie thought he'd save a few dollars forming his LLC online. With no guidance, he did it wrong. When he sold the property, he lost thousands and thousands of dollars. He did himself in by trying to do it himself. Don't burn yourself. Use Corporate Direct to set up and maintain your LLCs and corporations. Corporate Direct is owned and operated by attorney and rich dad advisor Garrett Sutton. Garrett wrote the bestsellers Loopholes of Real Estate and Start Your Own Corporation. He is Robert Kiyosaki's attorney for asset protection. He and his team will do it right. Visit them at corporatedirect.com or call 800-600-1760. Mention Rich Dad and receive $100 off your formation fee. That's corporatedirect.com. corporatedirect.com.
Log on to richdadradio.com while you listen. Now back to Robert Kiyosaki.
Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. You can listen to the Rich Dad Radio program anytime, anywhere on iTunes or Android. And you can listen to this podcast again. All you have to do is go to richdadradio.com. The reason we archive all of our podcasts, like the one today with Dr. Ron Paul, is so you can listen to it again. And when you listen to it again in a second and third time, you'll pick up even more of the significance of what this great man is saying. And also, as important, is have your friends, family, and business associates listen to this program, again, at richdadradio.com, and discuss it. When you discuss it, you'll see what I'm talking about, where, you can see clearer now. So once again, we're talking to Ron Paul, and I've asked him the question. Everybody there's booms, there's busts, there's crashes. Like in 2008 was a crash, a big crash that nobody really talks about. They talk about the 1929 crash, but the 2008 was a mega crash. But we're talking about the next crash possibly, and I hope it's not true, being a collapse of the system. And the reason we have Ron Paul on this program is because he's been warning about this since I first came across his work in the 1970s. So, Dr. Paul, any comments you have on collapses and crashes and what the differences are to you?
Well, the crash is not quite as bad as the collapse. The crash is probably shorter in a national sense. It's a crash of a stock market. A collapse to me just means it's bigger and worse, but also monetarily it means that the currency loses its value and everybody suffers, which means to me that if you've been using the currency, that is the inflation of the currency, for spreading the wealth, that a lot of people get to live beyond their means, and I think that's what's happening. I think even our country today lives way beyond its means, but when the collapse comes, it means the ball game's over. People recognize it's been a fraud. It was counterfeit money, and so people run for the exits. And therefore, if it's an overall collapse, everybody essentially will have to live beneath its means. We have to make an effort to try to protect ourselves as individuals and our families, and think about all kinds of things. But it's something that is going to be very difficult, because the biggest unknown, if you just had to deal with the economic adjustment, that is one thing. But if you're dealing with it with an authoritarian government that is coming in and preventing you from doing it, just look. The first thing that Roosevelt did was take away our gold in 1933 because he didn't want us to take care of ourselves, and that's the way governments work. So the issue to me is, are they going to leave us alone? Are they going to allow us to have our freedom? So the investment, I believe in preparation, the best we can with precious metals and property and that sort of thing. But I've invested a lot of time and energy in something that I think is important, and that is getting people to understand what liberty is, what it's all about, and why the country was great, and why we're precariously tipping over now, and we're going to lose it if this continues. But
let me go back to the question. This is kind of my definition between a crash and a collapse. You see, if the stock market crashes, it doesn't really affect me, but it affects anybody who's in the stock market. But if the monetary system collapses, and that's what we were talking about in 1971 when Nixon took us off the gold standard, the monetary system collapses, everybody goes down with it. Is that
essentially, but there's always going to be somebody that's going to have some gold in the bank.
Well, I understand. I understand that, but I'm supposed
to be able to survive. There'll be survivalists, but no, the collapse is going to bother everybody.
That's what I'm saying.
We have a society which I resent very much, and I brought this up with Federal Reserve Board chairman, and they don't. They admit I'm right. They say we have a system now that punishes people who are frugal and want to be responsible and take care of themselves, and they put money in the bank to take care of their old age, and they make 0.5%, and that's criminal. And that's where the real problem is what we want is something where the government is not in our way and causing the trouble. And yet the challenge that we have now, did the government give us our problems, or did free enterprise give us our problems? And right now, the people that are the demagoguing out there are claiming, oh, well, it's just too much freedom and too many dumb people not knowing how to take care of themselves.
And they're blaming capitalism, aren't they?
Yeah, that's the whole thing, and yet I have to join in on some of their complaints, but I don't call it capitalism. I call it cronyism.
What's your definition of cronyism?
Well, anytime you get unearned benefits from government, which is, a lot of people, probably that's one of the reasons it keeps going is probably everybody indirectly, one way or the other, is getting some benefits from the government. When you think of all the beneficiaries, whether you're in the welfare recipient category or Social Security and Medicare and all this, and the military-industrial complex and all the contracts that governments get, and it's all financed by debt and printing money.
So, Dr. Paul, we're an international program. We probably have more listeners outside this country than inside. And, Kim and I just got back from Australia, and they think they're safe because they're, thousands of miles away in Australia. I'm getting back to the definition of collapse versus crash. If the U.S. dollar collapses, what happens to Aussie, the yuan, Japan, Europe? Aren't they affected also?
Oh, absolutely. Everybody will be affected because we're on a dollar reserve standard, and people deal with it, even though there are a lot of people right now are anxious to have a replacement, and someday there will be a replacement, and whether it comes after the whole collapse occurs, but it'll have to be replaced. So some people may survive better than others. It probably depends on the type of country it is and how they manage things. But I think every country in the world will be affected to some degree. Just like right now, everything that we do, on the bailouts. I mean, even what happened in this last correction. I mean, we spent up to like $15 trillion bailing people out. Not only our mortgage companies and domestic banks and all this, but foreign central banks and foreign governments, because it's endless. They've been conditioned to believe there's no end in sight. And Bernanke used to brag about this. He said, no matter what the problem is, I can create enough money to solve every problem. He right now is trying to say, see, I told you I could take care of it, and they'll probably still be in denial, of what kind of a monster they've created. But you can't prove it until the monster appears.
So, Dr. Paul, let's say the collapse is coming in a year. what would you do to prepare?
Well, I would do exactly what I'm doing now. I try to have resources where I can make my purchases and take care of myself the best way I can. I do my best to educate my family, and I spend a lot of time trying to get people to join in the effort to distinguish between a free society, what personal liberty is all about, and why that is the answer, versus the reason why the enemy really is in counterfeiting money, central banking, big government, dependency on government, and that's the monster out there, and people have become very dependent.
Well, I know education is wonderful, but I think that is the problem because we have a bunch of school teachers teaching the world. My question is, what specifically? I mean, are you holding gold? Are you holding silver? What do you think about gold ETFs, silver ETFs, and those things? That's more specific right now.
Yeah, I think holding metals is the ultimate money. I mean, and it's not my opinion. That's what history has shown, that probably about 6,000 years of history. So when I made my decision that I ought to do something, somebody said, well, look, you didn't need it, and look how long you've been doing it. No, when it was $35 an ounce, I thought it would be a good idea, when it wasn't even legal. We weren't even allowed to buy gold.
But Dr. Paul, I was talking to some of my friends in Australia. This is the thing about education and freedom. Most people consider paper money. In other words, I was talking to this group. I was just in South Africa and Australia, and they say, "Well, I'd rather have the African rand and the Australian dollar than gold, because I can't spend gold, but I can spend the rand and I can spend the Aussie, I can spend the euro, the yen." But isn't that the problem? I mean, what you were talking about, FDR taking us off the gold standard, people got used to paper. Wouldn't you say that's a big part of the problem?
Yeah, it is, but I think you can find some examples, like right now in Iran, our stupid policies over there and the sanctions that we put on there, the average person is destitute, and they're digging on gold, and there's some gold exchanges going on, trying to survive in Iran. And I bet you if you were in Venezuela and you had some gold coin, I bet you could do a lot better than the people who are trying to use that paper. No, paper always goes back to its intrinsic value, which is zero. So that'll be the case. But the education isn't like in the next week or two. I think longer term, and that's why I have a homeschooling program where they don't get their minds cluttered by government schools. I think it took me probably 10 years or more to get rid of the ideas that were pumped into my head, in all the government schools.
Yep.
And but I think in our program, our Ron Paul curriculum is not super big, but there's a lot of people that are very sincere, and people do make changes. But I think you have to have people's minds changed so that they know that paper is different than gold. But most of the people aren't going to understand that. It's the people who.
That's how simple it is. To me, I'm going that these guys would rather. My friend got into a fight with his wife because she can spend her, Aussie dollars, but she can't spend gold.
But they don't know what a collapse is like.
That's right. That's what I want to understand.
And that's why you have the Liberty Report. You have RonPaulInstitute.org. The Liberty Report is fantastic. I got to ask you though. How you ran for president twice? How is Mr. Trump doing, and what would you do if you were president?
Well, I like what Trump has done on taxes, and I like what he's done on some regulations, and I think he has such a confusing, disconnected foreign policy. It makes no sense whatsoever, and I think that's very, very dangerous. I think long term, if we're talking about a collapse in the financial system, he's a typical Republican Democrat who says that deficits don't matter. And even when Reagan got in, who was a good president and moved things in a certain direction, but he did nothing to slow up the spending and the deficits. I mean, they've exploded, and Trump is doing the same thing. I think that's very, very dangerous. I think the president president doesn't have a personal concern about privacy and civil liberties that the libertarians would have, but I worry a lot about the foreign policy.
So
if you watch my program, I praise him though when he said, "Well, this at least talked to the North Koreans."
Yeah,
Great.
Well, let me ask
the next day he says, "Well, I'm not going to talk to that guy anymore."
Yeah. Before you go, what do you think about this possibility of a trade war? Coming, is that any consequence? Some people say it's the worst thing that can happen.
I think in a way, I don't know. They don't want to call it a war, but what are they talking about? They're sort of angling for problems, and I think it's having an effect, and it's going to be have a greater effect as the statistics come in. And the whole thing is why that kind of thing bothers me is a free market person doesn't believe in these on all these tariffs, but he doesn't realize that tariff is a tax on the American people. So I think that is, just not good economic policy, and it can't help. But there's always retaliation, and besides, I don't like the way it's done. The way the Constitution says that the Congress is responsible for regulating foreign commerce. But why is it the president can get up? Okay, today with $200 billion we're going to put on that. That is so bizarre. On it, nobody complains about it, about the technology, technique. But he could tomorrow, if he could tomorrow say, well, I'm sending 500,000 troops to so and so. Yesterday he decided, well, we're not ever going to leave Syria, So it's out of control.
So, Dr. Paul, thank you for your candor. Thank you for your points of view. And thank you for being that voice in the wilderness, educating people, bringing them to a reality like you did to me in the 1970s. I really thank you.
Robert and Kim, thank you very much for having me on.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you. So when we come back, we go into the next most popular part of our program is Ask Robert.
You're listening to the Rich Dad Radio Show with Robert Kiyosaki.
Don't be like Charlie. Charlie is that do-it-yourselfer who does himself in. Do-it-yourself is good for tile and grout. It is not good for asset protection. Charlie thought he'd save a few dollars forming his LLC online. With no guidance, he did it wrong. When he sold the property, he lost thousands and thousands of dollars. He did himself in by trying to do it himself. Don't burn yourself. Use Corporate Direct to set up and maintain your LLCs and corporations. Corporate Direct is owned and operated by attorney and rich dad advisor Garrett Sutton. Garrett wrote the bestsellers Loopholes of Real Estate and Start Your Own Corporation. He is Robert Kiyosaki's attorney for asset protection. He and his team will do it right. Visit them at corporatedirect.com or call 800-600-1760. Mention Rich Dad and receive $100 off your formation fee. That's corporatedirect.com. corporatedirect.com.
Financial freedom begins with financial education. Now back to Robert Kiyosaki and the Rich Dad Radio Show.
Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. Once again, you listen to the Rich Dad Radio program anytime, anywhere on iTunes or Android. And all of our programs are archived at richdadradio.com. Once again, we'll archive them so you can listen to it again. But more importantly, share it with friends, family, and business associates and discuss it. When you do that, you'll be surprised how much clearly you can see what's coming. And my thanks again to former Congressman Ron Paul and presidential candidate. I've been a follower of his since the 70s. He hasn't changed his song. And what I'm saying is we're in it right now. This is not a crash. This is a collapse. And so I would trust you guys, discuss this with your friends, family, and business associates. Let the fur fly if it has to, but many people are sound asleep right now. And this is not a crash, this is a collapse. And a collapse is when it goes systemic. Like a stock market crash is just regional. A monetary crash is systemic because the dollar, U.S. dollar, which is the reserve currency of the world since 1944, is going down. If that goes down, what are you going to do? Any comments, Kim?
Well, one thing that Ron Paul said at the break, he said one of the differences between a collapse and a crash is that a collapse happens in a flash. It doesn't come with much warning. And that's why we keep saying, get prepared, get prepared, get prepared. And Ron Paul says the same thing that we say is one thing you can do right now is get physical gold because that's real money. And if there's a collapse and the banks freeze up and money's not available, you will have something that you can buy things with.
And it's happening right now, sports fans. It's collapsing as we speak.
It is in many countries.
You can see it because economies on the outside of the global system are collapsing. Argentina is now right behind Venezuela. Argentina is a very, very rich, prosperous country. Nicaragua is there right now. So sports fans, it's not far away. Just pay attention to what's happening. Once again, thank you to Ron Paul, and you can submit your questions now to AskRobert@richdadradio.com. First question, Melissa.
Our first question today comes from Ryan in San Angelo, Texas. Favorite book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Robert, what do you think will be the thing that triggers the collapse?
Well, there's many problems. You know, like when everybody's happy, yeah, we got bin Laden. I said, well, when you shot bin Laden, you created 10,000 more bin Ladens. Every kid wants to be a bin Laden now. You know, he's my hero. So just remember that. We just created more of them. And the cyber current, these cyber attacks, all you need is a little Macintosh computer and you can be a cyber terrorist. You know, before you had to build a whole weapon, you had to build, ships and planes and boats and all that stuff to attack. All you need is a little computer and you can attack right now. You can bring down the whole kit and caboodle system. So the whole thing about it is anything can happen. But I think the biggest one that's going to bring us down that people are not paying attention to is pensions. You know, all of these guys I have Social Security, a good deal. But it's all these state and government, police officers, firefighters, state teachers, and all this. All these guys who are like my poor dad who drank the Kool-Aid of, I have a good government job and I'll have a pension. All you guys with 401ks, you're screwed, but I have a government pension. That's going to be the biggest blow up because I was just talking to my friend in California, and he says most of his friends have no idea that CalPERS, which is the largest public employee pension in the United States, is $1 trillion underwater. Those California people, God bless them, they're not going to get paid from the state of California. The difference between the state of California and Social Security is federal. The feds can print money. California cannot. Any comments, Kim?
Well, and when you're expecting your pension, you are typically retired. You're typically in your 50s and 60s, and all of a sudden you've got nothing coming in, so you're going to have to go back to work. They're talking about people working until the day they die, if they can find a job.
Look at the states that are in the worst shape. Some of our big states like New Jersey, California, New York, Hawaii. You look at not a big state, but they're in serious trouble. And these pensioners, these baby boomers my age, they're sitting there sucking on their Kool-Aid pops. They think the money is going to be there.
And that's why all they keep doing is trying to suck more money via taxes and raising taxes and adding new taxes and trying to get more and more money out of your pocket to keep funding these pensions.
And where do those taxes come from? Real estate. So all of you guys there with real estate like Kim and I, be very, very careful. Because the state of California right now is going after anybody who left the state recently and anybody
which is
who
a
has
lot
real
of people
estate.
who are leaving the state of California.
You think the people are running out of Somalia and all that. They're running out of California and New York. So please pay attention to these things called pensions. I have a safe, secure job. I'm a police officer, and I'm making $1 million a year off my pension. Well, you're bankrupting the whole system. And every day today, 10,000 people my age are retiring. They're out of time. They're getting their fat checks. An average school teacher makes $100,000 on their pension. The trouble is the pensions are broke. So you just do the math. If 10,000 are retiring a day, that's a lot of money sucking out of the coffers of the state governments. So that's what I'm watching right now. And that's why I suggest to people, if they start pulling, that stock market will come down too. So I wrote about this. I predicted it was 2016. And I was off by 2 years. What I didn't see is exactly as Ron Paul said, is how much money the Fed would print to keep the markets from crashing. So we're in the crash right now. Just look at Argentina. Their interest rates are now 60%. The U.S. government had to give them the IMF gave them $50 billion to keep them bobbing in the water out there. So sports fans, Get off that Kool-Aid and start listening to people like Ron Paul. Next question, Melissa.
Our next question comes from Bren in Spokane, Washington. Favorite book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Robert and Kim, I'd like to know what the two of you are doing in both your personal and professional lives to prepare for the upcoming market correction or crash.
We have not changed, right,
We've
Kim?
been doing the same thing for years and years and years and years.
Gold, silver, guns, bullets, real estate, and cash. I don't like cash, but I think what's going to happen pretty soon, there's going to be a cash shortage. And when that happens, holy moly. So I always say savers are losers, but in this crash, some cash will help. So, and by the way, what we're doing for our companies, we have our cash outside the bank system so that our employees will always receive paychecks.
And the gold is also outside the bank system. But
we're outside the system.
We've been doing gold, silver, real estate for the last 30 plus years, even more. So the formula hasn't changed.
Nothing has changed.
Can you explain, Robert, what outside the system means?
Outside the banks?
Just for our listeners, yeah.
Outside the banks, outside the U.S., legally. The rich always hold their money in a secondary country. And the reason for that is in case they have to run, they can take their land, but their money, their gold or silver is in another country. But you have to do it legally because the Fed, the government's cracking down really, really hard on that. So find an attorney and find out how to do it legally, because if they catch you, like you did all the people in Panama and Switzerland, they'll take your money back. So there's a way of doing it legally and doing it illegally, but you want to stay outside the banking system and the government system. My friend in New York, my classmate when I was in school in New York, said to me, he says, his parents were in Germany. And then when Hitler came to power in 1933, the same year that FDR came to power, says, my parents left Germany because they're Jews. And they say, all his friends say, oh, why are you worried? Why are you worried? It's just Hitler. No, we're out of here. So what my friend says, the pessimist left Germany and they moved to New York and got rich. So the pessimist left Germany, went to New York, got rich. Says the optimist went to Auschwitz. Thank you for listening to the Rich Dad Radio Show. You can submit your questions to Ask Robert at Rich Dad Radio. Thank you to Ron Paul. Final words, Kim?
So as Ron Paul says, as we say, pay attention, get prepared, because this crash is coming. We don't know exactly when. It started already, but get prepared. If you do nothing else, just go buy some gold. Start.
Or silver. Even start some silver. Silver is $20. You can afford everybody in the world can afford $20. But as James Rickard says, it's not the snowflake, it's the last snowflake that causes the avalanche. Thank you for listening.